Hello, everyone, and welcome to this live episode of Young Guns here on the OUTSET Podcast Network. If you're watching us live, welcome. Feel free to tweet us questions at OUTSET Magazine. You can also use the nifty little Google Q&A feature. I'm not exactly sure how it works, but somehow your questions will get to us. If you're listening to the recorded versions, make sure to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes and go and follow and like OUTSET on all your social media channels. We're discussing this week the RNC convention in Cleveland, and I'm joined by Evan Schrage, who is an OUTSET contributor, Kaytee Moyer, who is an OUTSET contributor, and Cade Marsh, who is the chairman of the Florida College Republicans, and I, of course, am Stephen Perkins, editor-in-chief of OUTSET. So let's kind of go down this list of days, if we will, and I want to get some thoughts on different things, but I think the most important thing to start off, what started off the week, was a big delegate revolt. And I first want to go to the two people who were there, which was Cade and Kaytee, and talk about what the energy was like in Cleveland whenever you had this, you could call it a last attempt, or whatever you want to call it, whenever you had this revolt with delegates. They wanted a roll call vote, things of that nature. Kaytee, we'll start with you. What was the energy like in that room?
It was feeling pretty hostile at that moment, only because the majority of people seemed that they were just about fed up with this movement at that point. Being at the convention, about ready to bring Trump in as the official nominee, a lot of people were just not tolerating these kind of shenanigans at that point. So it was a pretty hostile situation. There was one woman, I believe it was a delegate from Colorado, I believe, who afterwards in the females' restroom was like verbally attacked by some other delegates. So that's just a small glimpse into the kind of tension that was felt during those moments.
Now, I remember going up to the convention, there was a lot of talk about, especially way back when, if you remember when Cruz maybe kind of sort of had a chance, there was this talk about Trump delegates possibly getting very angry at other delegates. Cade, did you notice those same tensions, and what was your read on the convention from the viewpoint of how the delegates acted?
I think there was certainly quite a bit of animosity, on the floor itself. But I really don't think it had anything to do really between different groups of delegates. I think the closest thing I felt to anger was just extreme exasperation, and I can confess, I was definitely, one of those people who just, at the whole proceedings, I realized that at some point it had just become showmanship.
Mm-hmm.
At some point, between Ken Cuccinelli or Kelly Unruh or Rance Priebus, like whoever it may be. They were all actors, with lines in a play. The outcome had already been decided. It was very evident. It was very clear to see. And yet, the sort of this Pied Piper, this flute march over the cliff, this just nonsensical sort of exchange of ideas that still had to happen, in order to come to the logical conclusion. So there was certainly some exasperation. I think there was certainly animosity between individuals. I don't think sort of maligning Trump supporters versus Cruz supporters would be accurate or helpful. I think individuals, definitely there was a lot of perhaps tension. For instance, the Trump supporters, I'm told, were wearing neon hats the entire convention. They were, instead of Make America Great Again hats, and so they were able to identify each other on the floor. And there was wheeling and dealing going on between individual states, and at the last minute several states pulled out because the Never Trump people had failed to secure a majority of the party delegation within those states. So it was fascinating to sort of watch for sure, but also inevitable.
Evan, as someone who's involved in the party, from the analysis that I've heard from grassroots party members is that specifically the roll call vote actually did kind of matter. They wanted to see, first of all, to make sure that their delegates were doing the job that they were sent there to do, as well as see where some of their elected officials stood and other actors within that convention floor. What did you think about the roll call movements? What do you think? Is there an importance to it? Should it have been done, in your view, was it done correctly?
Right, so trying to, essentially what happened with the Rules Committee, certifying the certification of the rules, was the entire all of the Republican delegates were in the room, and in order to pass something, the simplest way to do it is by a voice vote, and everybody that wants it says yay, and everybody else that doesn't want it says no. You just need the chair to think that there was a majority of the delegates saying yay in order for something to pass. In truth, it's subject to the will of the chair, and there's not much that you can say because it's whatever the chair calls. So clearly on the first vote, what you saw was actually a lot of what's called division, where it's not very clear that a majority of the delegates wanted the Rules Committee's petition to be approved. And so that's why they had to, right afterwards, cut the mics for a little bit and go back and decide what went wrong. Because once you have division, that necessarily triggers a roll call vote. In that instance, every delegate gets a slip of paper and they say, would you like to, approve the rules or not? And the delegates will vote, based on their preference. They're not bound by any kind of, even people who are bound for Trump don't necessarily have to approve the rules that would have benefited Trump in the long run. Was it appropriate? I think that this entire thing was Trump's convention. It was all about making sure the party looked unified. So do we really want to spend time with party squabbles on things like the rules, which the entire purpose of people saying no to the rules was to try and get a vote, another roll call vote for Trump for the nomination. So was it appropriate? Probably not. Was it just the way kind of politics works? I think that's pretty consistent with across how party conventions usually handle themselves. If you'll recall, during the 2012 Democratic convention, where there was a provision about whether or not Israel had a right to exist or something was going on in the platform, and very clearly the Democrats were not in favor of that plank in the platform, but the chair kind of overruled them and said, well, we're going to keep it in anyway. And so it's just kind of the way it happens, and I don't think it was anything especially dirty because Trump was in charge.
Right. Party conventions are generally a little chaotic, and especially the first night, all eyes were on them. The media was certainly watching the convention very closely because they were looking for some sort of little uprising, and that kind of gave them a nice little picture to frame for the convention. But another top story out of Monday was Melania Trump's speech, which I thought was very good. Besides the drama that surrounded it, I thought she gave a really good speech. She told her story. She told about the human side of Donald Trump that maybe a lot of people don't see or can't see, or for whatever reason there. But nonetheless, was a good speech. But it was it was essentially overlooked by this thing of plagiarism. And Kaytee, you and I went on Crystal Heath's show on Tuesday to talk about this, and you made some really good points. So I want to give you an opportunity to kind of give your view on that. The plagiarism, or the supposed plagiarism in Melania Trump's speech, what was your view on that?
I think that it's honestly just the media just being really negative. I think that this whole issue could be thrown away if whoever, I mean, I know it's a little bit different now, but I think the person who wrote the speech should be fired. I heard that she put in her resignation, and then the Trump campaign did not accept it. That is what I had heard. I'm not 100% positive of that. But I just think this is not a huge story. I mean, there are so many other things that you could be focusing on in her speech, and I feel like the media is always looking for something negative to be harping on. So yes, they should not be plagiarizing, obviously. But the person who wrote the speech should just be fired, and then we should just move on and talk about all the other great things that were happening that night, the other great parts of her speech, because just seems like people are looking for anything negative that they can out of the convention.
For sure. Like I said, the media was certainly tuned into that. And when those revelations came out, I thought, wow, this is what they wanted, and this is certainly going to be used. But it didn't really go throughout the week. I mean, it was still kind of a meme throughout the week, but it wasn't as harped on as much. But Chris Christie defended her, saying that it was not plagiarism because 93% of the speech was original. Evan, you had a good tweet about that, saying that if he turned in a legal brief where 7% of it was plagiarized, things would not go in his favor. Your thoughts?
Oh no, of course. I chuckled at that. I was like, you gotta be kidding me. Even like a legal brief, whatever, a college term paper, 93%. Oh, well, please, professors, let me pass the grade. No, I mean, I could get kicked out of school for that. It's 7%. Give me a break. And that guy wants to be Attorney General, we're pretty sure. So I feel really comfortable with that. Was it the biggest of deals? Yeah, I think it was a big deal because Trump always talks about how he's going to be surrounded by the best people and the best writers and the best researchers and the best everything. And here we have somebody who can't even bother to check their speech right before they go on stage. And I'm not talking about Melania herself. I'm talking about everybody that works, for Melania. That's embarrassing, especially in the RNC convention. Like on the prime time for Melania to kind of introduce herself to the world, you have speechwriters that can't figure out what they're doing. So yes, I thought Michelle Obama gave a very good speech on Monday, and I think we're going to look forward to more things from her in the future. And as soon as Trump can actually figure out how to hire the best people, I think we'll see some real progress from the Trump campaign.
Cade, I'd imagine that that it's different seeing the speech in the room than it is on television. When people started, well, first of all, I'll ask you, just so we're not harping just on the plagiarism bit. What did you think of Melania Trump's speech in general, and then what was some of the reaction that you heard whenever there was this report of 7% plagiarism?
Well, I think the speech accomplished the one thing that it was supposed to do, which was put Melania on the map and to legitimize Trump's human side. And I think it absolutely did that. And I want to just throw this out there, and this is like as far on the conspiracies like theory side of the spectrum as I'm really willing to go. So I don't know if I believe this, but it did make me chuckle when I saw it on Facebook. I mean, for anybody who's read The Art of the Deal, one of the biggest sort of sales tactics you can have is called thinking past the sale, which is something my grandfather always taught me as assuming the close. Good salesman always assumes the close. And the one thing that has transpired out of this is you have seen Michelle Obama, the current First Lady, and Melania Trump, the prospective next First Lady, side by side in the media since the moment that she has stepped on stage. So I don't know if this was intentional. I'm super, super not willing to go ahead and put myself out on a limb there. But regardless, I mean, that has been the outcome of this, is Melania has been portrayed as the future First Lady, to borrow the name of the organization, in a way that Michelle Obama, or sorry, that Bill Clinton can just never really be compared to. I don't know if that has any real bearing on exactly how the speech was written, but I can tell you that her speech was written in such a way that it was able to humanize Trump and legitimize her, which was something that she had struggled with in the polls and in public opinion beforehand.
Well, that's an interesting point. So yeah, you did see a lot of videos kind of comparing those two side by side. Maybe it planted some ideas in people's minds. That's an interesting idea. I also think that we talk so much about Michelle Obama's fitness and her large arms. I'm just surprised that Melania Trump did not get the same treatment in regards to how fit she is. I don't know. Maybe that's it's not relevant, but I just think that it would have been fun. So day one was Make America Safe Again, and we make America safe again by revolting on the floor and giving plagiarized speeches or whatnot. The second day was Make America Work Again, and we have someone like Chris Christie, who is soon to be possibly maybe out of work or going into the Trump administration's cabinet. So Chris Christie's speech to me seemed like, first of all, I am very proud of him for not like pouting on stage, because he could have very easily got up there and been all kind of sad. But what was interesting to me is he was, and this is going to be very anti-Trump, and I try to remain partial, as you all know, but he was putting the responsibility of deciding if Hillary Clinton was guilty or innocent in the hands of those delegates. And those delegates made a lot of questionable choices, and so I'm not exactly sure if they were the best judges of guilt or innocence. But I did think it was an interesting strategy, and it had a lot of people talking about it, because it wasn't about Donald Trump. It wasn't about the Republican Party. This is really when the theme of the week became more about anti-Hillary Clinton than pro-Republican Party. Cade, we'll start with you this time. Chris Christie's speech, how did you read that?
I think you hit the nail 100% on the head. It represented a pivot from let's talk about what we're doing here to, okay, why are we really, like, what is the ultimate goal? What it really gave, the Republican Party, the delegates on the floor, and what I think it came at a perfect time was it really beautifully, and starkly painted the image of the ultimate enemy. It's no longer, Trump versus Cruz versus Rand Paul versus Rubio versus Jeb. It's no longer infighting. It's a here's why we are all here. We have a hill to take, and it is a really large hill, and it's one led by the most corrupt individual in American politics, and she needs to be in jail, if not tied to an electric chair. That was sort of the overwhelming consensus on the floor that night. And the way that Christie ramped up his speech, there's nobody who's able to say that Chris Christie did not work that room, like, absolutely 100% through and through. And I think of all the people to be able to deliver that speech, I think he was definitely up there on the list of people best qualified.
Kaytee, what is your view of the attack Hillary strategy? For me, or not necessarily for me at home, but I think for a lot of people at home, they would have rather seen from this week a more here's what we stand for instead of here's what we stand against. But obviously Chris Christie's speech, like we said, was kind of that pivot. So do you think that it was actually effective in driving home kind of the Republican stance, or could it have been done differently? Can't hear you.
We lost you, Kaytee.
Can't hear you yet. The joys of a live show. We can't hear you yet, Kaytee. Why don't you try joining back in, and I'll go to Evan for that one right now, and you can try to join back in and see if that fixes it. Evan, what were your thoughts on that?
Sorry, what was the question?
So Christie's speech was kind of this pivot. Instead of pro-Republican, it was more anti-Hillary. Do you think people at home, you weren't at the convention, but you watched from home, but do you think that the average voter is going to look at that and say, yeah, this is a party that I can get behind? Because, in other words, is the anti-Hillary message resonating with people in the same way that a pro-Republican Party message would be?
Oh, absolutely not. And I think that they really shot themselves in the foot here last night, or the other night, when Chris Christie was doing the chants and lock her up and things like that. Okay, regardless of your opinion about whether or not Hillary should have been indicted or should have been prosecuted for the things that she did, the FBI and the Justice Department said, we're not going to press charges against her. So now what you have is the potential next Attorney General saying, well, what do you all think? This is like, the crowd chanting to, whether we want Jesus. We want Jesus or something. I'm not saying Hillary's Jesus by any sense, but this person who said we can't really find anything to make a case out of it, well, we're going to lock her up anyway. If that's just, what kind of person, what average voter is sitting there saying, you know what, these people will treat criminals fairly in society, everybody's going to get their due process because, you know what, they treated Hillary rightly. They judged it by the crowd. That's exactly what you're supposed to do. I mean, this was absolutely ridiculous. I have no idea what they were possibly trying to prove, other than a lot of people think that the Justice Department made the wrong decision. And that's fine. You can think that way. But the whims of the crowd, and I understand Trump's run a very populist message this entire campaign, but the whims of the crowd, which is an extremely partisan crowd in the RNC convention, allowed anybody, on election day to vote for the people that, well, if a lot of these other people think you're guilty, you probably are guilty, and we should probably lock you up. That's ridiculous.
Cade, do you think you can go from Trump's McDonald's delivery boy to Attorney General? Do you think that that's a realistic path that Chris Christie is on?
Holy crap! There's no chill in this interview whatsoever.
We throw some shade.
Whoa, okay. I think so. I genuinely believe so. I don't think Chris Christie shot himself too badly in the foot. And I think he genuinely lived up to a lot of people's expectations in the good way, with his speeches. And I got to disagree with Evan. I don't think he really was advocating necessarily for a policy position or a platform plank. I think, lock her up is designed to be a rallying cry, a remember the Alamo, not we just lost the Alamo, now here's our strategic tactical plan on how to take it back and how to win the Mexican-American War. It's we're pissed off about this, what are we going to do? How are we going to use this? How are we going to galvanize this? How are we going to let this galvanize us into a stronger party, into a stronger resistance, to this overarching theme, which is Hillary Clinton.
Throwing her in jail, that's how we're going to do it.
Say it again, sorry.
Like throwing somebody who hasn't been prosecuted in jail, and that's essentially what they were saying. Though that's I guess my whole point is choose something different if that's not what you meant, but lock her up, that's a little...
Well, I did say that I do hope they have a better ground game in 2016 than just we want Hillary Clinton to be in jail, because while there's many people who agree with that, it's not how they're going to win an election, because it's not going to happen. But I certainly understand why he did that. I will say Christie's speech was not off-brand. It was very much a Chris Christie speech. Yes. He was not trying to be something that he wasn't. So I thought it was a good speech from the viewpoint of who delivered it. But Kaytee, did you have any thoughts about Chris Christie's speech? Welcome back with your audio, by the way.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I think that the anti-Hillary message is the strongest message that the Trump campaign has, as well as the anti-whatever is going on right now. A lot of people that I spoke with are not necessarily, I mean, don't get me wrong, there are a lot of people who truly believe in Donald J. Trump, but a lot of people are just very he's going to change everything. He is the anti-Hillary Clinton. He's the anti-establishment. And a lot of people have said that they're not necessarily so excited about him, that they have trouble defending some of the things he says, but they just like that he's going to go in there and he's going to change the system up, and he's going to expose Hillary for the person that I think that she is, which is very corrupt. So I think that's a really good and a strong message. It's something that has been extremely appealing to me. One of my followers on Twitter I was talking back and forth with, and he said to me, I know what I'm voting against in November, and that means that I will be voting for Donald Trump. And I think that is a very solid point. The anti-Hillary Clinton message is probably one of the strongest messages that the Trump campaign can put out there, especially to get people who can't necessarily get on board with Donald Trump and his ideology, but they can get on board with the fact that Hillary Clinton is the worst thing that can happen to this country in November.
I will say that the newly developed idea that if you don't vote for Trump, you're voting for Hillary, as flawed as I think that is, it is gaining traction, and there are a lot of people who do believe that. And on top of that, Trump has been successful at launching these anti-insert persons names here type of campaigns. That is how one of the ways that I believe he won the primary, and so it is kind of his brand now, if you will. And perhaps it'll, I don't know, I'm not at the point anymore where I'm going to make predictions for 2016 because you can't do it. It's a dumb thing to do if you're going to say that this will work or this won't work. But it's certainly interesting, and I think I've said from the very beginning that, as many people have said, I'm not that original, but this election will be studied very closely by future political scientists, by future campaigners. I mean, this, as Donald Trump said in a press conference today, he won the nomination with a small budget and a small staff, and everyone else had huge budgets, even bigger staffs. And so his model has seemed to be working so far. Whether that translates into a general election bid, that'll be interesting. So that was Make America Work Again. Let's go to day 3, Make America First Again. And Cade, we're going to start with you because Marco Rubio delivered a video message. He was not able to be there in person, but he delivered a video message, and whenever he dropped out, he was not willing to say that he would endorse Donald Trump, but in his video message he did, and he also laid forward kind of his usual talking points, if you will, about the future of the Republican Party and why Republican ideas are better for the country than Democratic ideas. So what were your thoughts on his endorsement after many months of saying that he was not going to?
I think it was strategic, just like I think Speaker Ryan's tete-a-tete with Donald Trump at the beginning of sort of the assumption of his nomination began. I think all of these actors, all of these players represent a different silo within the Republican Party, a different tent stake, if you will, part of the big tent party. And I think putting up, and I don't want to, speak ill of anybody, but putting up a show of resistance or putting up resistance, and tempering the candidate or the nominee or the platform or the positions, in your quest to bring them closer to the center or bring them closer to whatever it is your view of Republicans are, I think that is something that's that's one of the most powerful things that somebody like Marco Rubio or Speaker Paul Ryan can do, because that helps bring those silos back into the Republican Party. I can tell you personally, in Florida, one of the greatest boons that I have had this election cycle was Marco Rubio re-announcing that he was running for Senate. And I lead a Republican organization, a college Republican federation here in the state, and we don't endorse before the primary, and it is still a contested primary, but I mean the polls have Marco Rubio above and away participating in the general election, after the primary ends. And that narrative has allowed me to bring those Rubio supporters, which was a substantial section of my demographic in Florida, back on board. And I think Rubio's speech had a lot to do with that in spirit, if not in kind. And I think without that explicit tacit endorsement of the Republican values that can still be seen in the nominee, in Donald Trump, it would be a lot harder for me to be able to message to those people effectively.
Now, Evan, your thoughts on well, first Rubio. It was kind of, in my view, and I think a lot of people's views, it was a very deliberate decision not to go to the convention. John Kasich also skipped the convention, as well as the Bushes and all these people. Mitt Romney, my father, also chose to skip the convention. But so the fact that Marco Rubio did end up at least contributing in some way is quite significant, especially since he is a former candidate. Like Cade was saying, it was seen as this unification, this olive branch, if you will. Do you think it was effective?
I think it was about as effective as Rubio and Trump could hope for at the convention. It was really weird because the only former Republican presidential nominee there at the convention was Bob Dole. And I think that
bless him.
Random, no offense to Bob Dole, ran a great campaign, had a tough fight against Bill Clinton, but none of the Bushes came, not John McCain, not Mitt Romney, so no, as far as effective, what it means when a presidential candidate doesn't, a former candidate doesn't come, I think there's a certain sense of sore loser. Do I think that Rubio intended to be a sore loser? That Trump's going to see it that way. But I think he still should have been there if he really wanted to kind of. It's weird because while you're trying to distance yourself from Trump, which is clearly what Rubio was trying to do by not showing up, you're also at the same time saying, well, I still kind of need you Republicans because I'm in a tough Florida battle here, and unlike, Ted Cruz, who's kind of made his living off of being just unpopular with everybody, which he can afford to do because he's a senator from Texas, and no Democrat will ever win a statewide election in Texas, for the foreseeable future. It kind of came off, at least to me, well, I don't really want to do this. I kind of don't want to be here, and I sympathize with him because I don't like Trump, and I wouldn't have shown up if I were him. But he's also trying to run as a Republican to show up at your party's convention, even if you don't necessarily like who's at the top of the ticket. Because if you're trying to run, even admittedly somewhat on Trump's coattails, it's very possible that he could win Florida. Trump could in November. You should show up and support your party, even if you don't necessarily like its next leader.
Kaytee, what did you think about Rubio's hostage video?
I feel like Rubio's been a sellout, and it kind of breaks my heart because I love Rubio.
Breaks a lot of people's heart.
But he's really a politician. I mean, he's a politician through and through. And so, I mean, and when I say that, I don't necessarily mean that as a bad thing. I understand why he's been making the moves that he's been making, but it's just really hard to take him at his word now I remember when that video came out of him, emotionally being like, man, it is hard for me to say that I'm going to support Donald Trump, and then to, have that video at the convention. I understand he needs his party, and but it's disappointing with Marco Rubio. And I think it's a good thing. I think that he should. I think ultimately when you are a big leader in your party, you need to stand with your party, especially in an election that is going to be as close as it appears right now it's going to be. It's just, for me personally, a little bit disappointing.
And I think what really fuels this is first of all, the GOP is realigning. There are real realignments happening within the party, and there's also real realignments happening within the Democratic Party. And I feel as if a lot of people, politics is all about strategy, and when you're a politician who sees future elections in your future, you have to be responsive to those changes. And I think a lot of Republican politicians are saying, okay, I don't like the Trump, or I don't like what Trump is bringing to the GOP, but I have to adapt if I have a future. And there's a case to be made that they shouldn't do that, or that you should maybe be able to break with your party at that point. But nonetheless, there is certainly that idea that they need to get on this train, or they're going to be left behind and they're not going to have a job. And in this economy, I mean, who would get a job after that? But one person who did not do that was Ted Cruz. He also spoke Thursday night, and he spoke towards the end, booze, because he said, vote your conscience. But Cade, what do you think about Ted Cruz's speech and his failure, inability, refusal to back Donald Trump?
Again, a lot of this all seemed very scripted and orchestrated. So I was not even a little surprised when Cruz didn't explicitly endorse. I was a little bit off-put, or not off-put, but confused by the tenor of his whole speech. It actually seemed far more amicable than I was expecting, which says something about the current state of internal GOP politics. That I was expecting a full-blown knockdown, drag-out fight on the convention floor. But Trump and Trump's team had seen his speech beforehand. He didn't deviate from it, other than sort of, minor, inconsistencies. He was allowed to go on, as a direct result of behind-the-scenes negotiations. I mean, it's politics as usual. There's no real, I think, surprise there. And I think what you see is something like what you're talking about, the realignments. You see the Republican Party changing. You see a massive populist movement as we are tapping into the silent majority voting base that has just simply not been considered for a very long time. And as conservative or libertarian or conservatarian or socially conservative or however, whatever silo of the Republican Party you think you are, at the end of the day, the biggest issue to the biggest number of people is the feeling of having been left out for the last 10, 20, 30, 40 years by their party, by their country, and by the world as a whole. And that's something that Donald Trump has absolutely tapped into. And so you see these different figures, these different, portions, leaders of different portions of the Republican Party aligning themselves differently. And I think it is natural and I think it's healthy for these people to be aligning separately. So Rubio obviously needs to win in a state where Donald Trump won all but one county, and it is Rubio's home state. So obviously he needs to align with Donald Trump, and he did an excellent job of throwing his support but maintaining his ideological consistency, in my opinion, and being able to garner those pro-Trump votes, and sort of shed the little Marco stigma. But at the same time, there's a lot that comes with physically being at a convention. I mean, there's media row, there's travel plans, there's the stress on yourself, your family, your campaign plans, everything else that you need to be an active participating member of the elected class. Whereas somebody like Ted Cruz is not up for election this year. He's right. He doesn't have a target election this year?
No.
Okay, yeah, I was about to say that's your state, not mine. But he has the freedom and the ability to separate himself out from the movement as a whole and maintain himself as a beacon. In the case that the populist movement that Trump represents dies down, or fails to reach its conclusion with an election as president, or fails to be an effective response to the issues that the country is facing, there's still a beacon, sort of those conservative values left in the party that people can come back and adhere to. Which is why, if you look at my Facebook and my Twitter, my biggest thing is I don't care what brand of conservative you are, quit bashing everybody else. Just
amen.
You're going to be conservative, and your job is to convince somebody else to vote for you, not screaming at them. So we're all going to have to play ball on the same field eventually. So let's shake hands before the game.
And I will say this, Ted Cruz's speech gave me hope as someone who, I don't like the Trump brand of conservatism, but I'm not about to leave the party just because the nominee is not someone who I support, someone I like. And I think Cruz's speech said there's more to it than this. Even though he didn't say, I don't like the nominee, it was very clear that he was basically reaching out and saying there's going to be a future, and there's more to it than just one nominee. There's this whole set of ideas. And also to me it sounded like a springboard for his future ambitions. They've said that perhaps he was campaigning for 2020 if Trump doesn't win, perhaps further on than that. We'll go to Evan. Evan, do you think that this speech was Cruz's attempt at trying to rebrand himself for the future? Because it was kind of a rebranding, wasn't it?
Oh, sure. And I mean, this was classic Cruz. This is something I fully expect Cruz to do. Come out and kind of non-endorse the candidate that he had been, fighting so hard. And they ultimately, at the end of the day, do represent very different visions of, I guess, conservatism. And Cruz is really banking on his... I still firmly believe if Trump had never entered this race, it was going to be Cruz that was going to be the nominee. Much as I wanted Jeb Bush to be the nominee.
Remember when Jeb Bush was the worst nightmare?
I know, right? Now look at all of you. So I think, and that's kind of Cruz, what he does. He's been planning for a very long time to, seek the next highest office and do everything he's done in the Senate, from following up filibusters after Rand Paul had his famous filibuster. He went and had one on Obamacare. Everything Cruz does is, and this speech will, at the end of the day, I think, very much help him in 2020 if there's no, if Donald Trump doesn't win in November. Because a lot of the Never Trump people, especially when National Review put out that big Against Trump piece, a lot of those people, the prominent figures in the Never Trump camp, were very pro-Cruz. So it was kind of a beacon to say, I'm still here, I'm still going to lead the fight for the kind of conservatism that you've come to know and love from me, and I'm not afraid to stand on my principles. And I think a lot of that, yeah, he's not running for re-election right now, so he's kind of more safe than Rubio was. But a lot of that just sounds like something Cruz actually is very principled, and he's one of those few people that's willing to go down for his principles.
So let's move on to unification, and specifically post-Trump speech. In our very scientific Twitter poll, we had 33% of respondents say that after Trump's appearance, after the convention, they are considering voting for him or they will vote for him. 67% said no. Kaytee, when you're talking to people, I know you talked to a lot of people this week when you were on the ground there. Did you get a sense that people, especially after Trump's speech, I don't know if you got the chance to talk to anyone after that, but are people moving towards him after this convention because they see, well, maybe he's not so bad?
I think that a lot of people are just realizing that this is the nominee for the Republican Party. This is the reality we're given. We have a Trump versus Clinton election, and you know, if you don't want Hillary Clinton to be the next president, you got to get on board with Donald Trump. So that's definitely what I've been seeing. On the same note about Donald Trump's speech, I want to make sure that I mention that Ivanka's introduction, I thought, was amazing. I was so inspired, and I loved everything that she came across as. I like what she talked about. I know that today some people were saying that it was had a lot of liberal leanings to it, but I'm going to go back through that speech and I'm going to read it, because when I was listening to it live, I thought she really chose her words very specifically, that she wasn't endorsing government intervention in healthcare, things like that, and I really want to make sure that she wasn't, but I thought that she was great. She was exactly what I would like to see as a female leader in the Republican Party, someone with poise and class, and I was really, really excited to see her do her thing up there.
During her speech, one of my progressive friends texted me and said, can she run for president instead? And I said, well, maybe in the future. It seemed like all the Trump children, their speeches were very good, and you got a good sense of who they were, and maybe they'll run for Congress in the future. I don't know. It's Barron Trump. I've been saying you better watch Barron Trump because he has devious little eyes from what I saw last night. I'm scared of that child.
No chill. You're gonna.
I'm just saying, Barron Trump looks like a dangerous.
I just want to like, how like classic Trump is it to name his kid Barron as
Right.
Robert?
I thought that too. Barron, and he has the same slick back hair as all of the Trump members except for his father, who can't slick back his hair.
Say what you want about the Trumps, but that is a family built on branding.
I agree, and as someone who enjoys branding, I give them that credit. But Kate, what did you think about Trump's speech? You can even talk about Ivanka's interest speech. Did it? Well, I guess I don't really know your stance, but did you get a sense that it was changing minds?
Are you asking me?
Yes, Cade.
Okay. So I voted for Rand Paul. I'm just gonna go ahead and preface this conversation with that. So I am very, very libertarian. Individual liberty, personal responsibility leaning version of conservative. I think Trump hit the nail on the head on a lot of things, and I think I saw the first couple rays of sunshine I've seen in this whole election process with a couple core things he said. And I posted one of them on Facebook, and my friends were just not ready for it, but he was talking about unmuzzling 501c3s, unmuzzling, the churches, and stop restricting, the expression of religious freedoms in individual political sort of discussions. And that is something that's very near and dear to my heart. My dad's a pastor. I was raised in the church, and it's a very valid concern. You lose your tax status, you lose your ability to be financially solvent, and that's an issue. And that's the sort of thing that I have just never in a million years would have expected to hear out of Donald Trump's mouth. It's not a popular issue. It's not something that people are talking about. It's not something where he's tapping into a vast wave of dissent among the American populace we've all missed. It's a fringe issue. Sorry for the voice crack. It's been a long week.
You're just passionate.
Exactly. That none of us were expecting. And that's the sort of thing that I can see the influence of the advisors that he has started to surround himself with. I've seen the influence of the meetings that he's had with, say, Speaker Ryan, Ted Cruz, Chris Christie, etc. And I think that he's starting to mature as a candidate. We're starting to mature as a party, and we're starting to get to the point where I can see my brand of conservatism start to sort of peek its head out, of this populist movement. And I think it gives me hope to continue participating, because insofar and for as long as I am participating in the process, I have a voice in changing the platform of the party itself.
So, Evan, I know you're excited. After the end of this week, you have Donald Trump, but flagged by Mike Pence. I know you're a big fan, so you're ready to support him. Yes,
I don't think I've ever been so excited to be a Republican in Cook County, Illinois, where my vote doesn't matter.
Christ.
It's very clear that what Trump's done this entire election is forum shop. It was very easy for him to go hard to the right in the Republican primaries, talk about immigration. Everything he touched on, he could point back to some sort of illegal immigration. Even his call out to the LGBT community had nothing to do with whether or not he considered them, like equal citizens under the law. It was just, well, there's these other people that are very scary and very far away, and I'm going to protect you because of that. The other things he started to do, it was very obvious that he has protectionist attitudes, very left-leaning attitudes. I saw on Twitter one of the hosts at MSNBC commented that Trump's policy, from a policy perspective, the speech was a very mainstream Democratic speech. And so what I think we saw here is Trump doesn't really care about winning any one base. He's looking for a majority of the American public to vote for him, and he doesn't care if that's from the left or the right. He's just trying to find a majority. And that's noble if he's a prime minister in parliament, but this isn't exactly how it works. And so I think it's going to be a long couple of months for this election, and it's not going to get any better, I don't think. And as of this point, I don't think I can support him just based on the fact that he won't stand on any sort of principle other than, well, immigration.
So I'm going to put you down as optimistic, and I will say that Trump's presidency, if he does do the whole prime minister approach, maybe we can finally have prime minister's questions in Congress.
That would be great.
That's the government reform that I live for. So hopefully that'll do it. Well, thank you guys for joining us. Tell everyone, we'll start with Cade. Cade, where can people find you online if they want to connect with you?
Twitter is the best spot. It's at Cade Marsh FL. That's CADEMARSH.
Okay, and Evan?
Same thing, Twitter, at Evan Schrage, at EVANSCHRAGE. I have a Bitmoji as my avatar.
And Kaytee?
You can find me on Twitter at Kaytee Moyer, KayteeMoyer.
Good deal. And you can also find OUTSET at OUTSET Magazine on Facebook.com/OUTSET Network. You can find me at Stephen_Perkins. You probably don't want to do that. I'm also not verified yet, which I don't think any of us are. It's a very sad day.
Yeah.
We'll get there. Start a movement. All right. Thank you all for joining us for the live episode. Thank you to all of our guests on the panel for their contributions, and we will see you again very soon. Thank you.